Alright, in this video I'm going to change the thermal paste in this Xbox One X. I got it for my kids and I'm going to sell their other Xbox One because this is obviously far superior to the Xbox One. I am going to do the hard drive as well, but that'll be a different video. This one's a little bit beat up. I got a really cheap price on it, but I also had to go to a little sketchier area than I would normally go on Facebook Marketplace, but it was well worth it. Everything turned out well. Like I said, I am going to do this another video on the hard drive as well, but I'm going to separate those videos. Now, you do want this little tool here, and this is to help you get the heatsink off. I got some coffee, I got thermal paste, and I got a screwdriver set that has Torx bits in it, and you're going to use those extensively on this thing, particularly small Torx bits. There are two screws to remove the top cover, and on this one there's a little piece of tape on the far right side covering the screw. So I'm just going to take that off. I'm sure there's a piece of plastic on the back covering the ports and that actually have them labeled. I don't have that, so you're going to have to figure that part out yourself. But there's two screws, and then the top slides forward towards the on-off button, and then it lifts up on one side and sort of cantilevers off. So it doesn't slide off all the way, it just slides forward a little bit, and then, like I said, lift up on one side, and then it should come free. And it is definitely a lot grosser to work on somebody else's old dust than your own. I don't mind touching my own dust from my own family, but as soon as it's somebody else's dust though, I don't like it. Now, I do start taking off all these screws, but then I go get a Sharpie because I find out that the screws aren't all the same length. So now when I'm taking off the screws, I just use the Sharpie marker to write an S or an L, because really there's two types of screws, short ones and long ones. And that is how I kept track of everything. I would recommend you do that. It really helped putting everything back together. I didn't have to think about it. There was no trial and error of putting screws in the screw holes to see if it worked or not. You just went straight at it. So there's one little pro tip. And definitely the tool to remove the heatsink off of the motherboard is the other sort of pro tip. I would get that first. Links in the description, by the way. As always, and they are available on Amazon for like 10 bucks or something like that. But I think well worth it because it did such a good job. Anyway, there's a lot of screws to remove here, and you got to take them all off. So just, you might as well commit to that. You're not going to get away with doing, fewer than all of them. There's a little connection here on the right-hand side. Take those two screws off, and then it sort of lifts up. Don't try to like slide it back. It has to pick up because there's a little plastic electrical connector in there. What it does, I don't know, but you got to move it. And it's attached with a ribbon cable. Obviously these ribbon cables, Xbox loves them for some reason, but you need to be careful with them so that you don't damage them, you don't bend them, you don't break them. There is another ribbon cable on the front as well, so I do need to take a few more things off. There's two little circuit boards left to do, so you can see I took out that little ribbon cable. That's the super small one, and then I'm just going to take the screwdriver and remove these. Now you do need to take them off because the connections go through the metal trays. So you can see that there's a little cutout on the metal tray, so it connects through it and into the motherboard. So that's why these little side things need to come off. You can't leave them on, unfortunately. And this is going to be the same on this side. And I just keep the screws with those little side pieces as well. And like I said, they have to come off because they are securing the motherboard in through the bottom tray. Now there's 4 screws that hold the back of the heatsink on. A little X pattern there, so those have to come off as well. So lots of screws. Then you can flip this thing over and you can lift off the rest of the plastic. Again, filthy with dust, super gross when it's somebody else's caked up dust. Now there's 2 more screws to get at here, and then you can separate everything. So lots of screws, lots of work to do. And I also labeled these ones. So then I'll take off the metal cover, and now you have access to everything. So if you're just going to do the hard drive, you're almost there. But this is the thermal paste video, so we're going to go deep on this. So first thing I'm going to do is remove the optical drive. It has 2 cables, and that is pretty much all there is to it. Just take off the cables, and then you can set that aside. So 2 little connections, and it's pretty obvious what's what here. And then I'm going to remove the hard drive, which is obviously a hard disk drive, and like I said, you can see the SSD. I am switching it 1 terabyte to 1 terabyte, so it's not really a capacity upgrade, although 2 terabytes would probably be good if you were doing this. I would recommend 2 terabytes instead of 1, and then the SSD is obviously beneficial. So I'll put that aside. Like I said, the other video is going to have how to do the SSD and how to format everything once you do it. I had a little bit of a trouble removing the power supply because some of these plastic pieces were bent up on it, but once I looked at the bottom of the motherboard, straighten out the little plastic legs, the power supply does just lift straight up. It shouldn't be secured in any way. And then here's the fan. Obviously, you need to disconnect all the wires. I gave the fan a little spin. It's in good shape. And then just pick the motherboard up out of the bottom tray. And that's the heatsink. It's pretty robust. I think Xbox does a pretty good job of building their machines. And for this little tool, it actually slides underneath and between. So this little X pattern thing hooks around and underneath. So you can see where it slots in, and then you just lift it up. Much easier than with a screwdriver. And something I learned from doing this on an Xbox One that I'm going to carry forward now is just to take a picture of the position of this rear cross bracing on the back so that you can put it on the right way. There's a whole bunch of little chips underneath it, so it is possible that you could put it on the wrong way because it is sort of symmetrical. So I would just watch that, and like I said, I just took a picture. Now I could pull off the heatsink, and the heatsink doesn't really have very good thermal paste, I would say, on the CPU, and it's also pretty dried off. So I'm going to use 99% isopropyl alcohol, not rubbing alcohol. This is different. Rubbing alcohol has like, not hand sanitizer, but like a hand moisturizer in it as well sometimes. So you don't want any of those extra additives in there. You just want that straight up isopropyl alcohol. So it should say like 99% or something like that. And I'm just using Q-tips. And I do use paper towel. I don't really do any serious rubbing with dry paper towel though. I just put a little bit more of that alcohol on it and then soak everything up. More of a dab to pick up all the pieces. And off camera, I do take all the components downstairs a little bit later, and I use the air compressor just to blow everything off of them, as well as to blow the dust out of the fan. Now for the CPU, same deal, Q-tip, alcohol, nothing too special. One thing I do with the CPU is just get a toothpick and sort of pick off some of the thermal paste that accumulated around the CPU, but I don't go crazy and remove it from every possible area I could find. Really, this thing could only go back in place one way, so you don't really have to worry about putting the heatsink on backwards. And from the Xbox One video I've already done, I know that sort of these rectangular CPUs get a pretty good spread of thermal paste if you go with this two-line method, so I'm going to do that on this one as well. And then obviously the heatsink could just go back onto the motherboard. The motherboard has 4 holes. There's little feet that go through those holes on the heatsink. And just checking it out for the spread I got with this thermal paste pattern, I'm pretty happy with it. The only thing I would say is it didn't go right out to all the 4 corners. So I'm just going to come in with the thermal paste and then just do a dab on each of the 4 corners, and that'll fix everything. It'll get a good smear and a good spread right out to the corners on this thing without dramatically overflowing things as Xbox did when they made this thing. So now I'm going to use the camera and the photo I took earlier to make sure that I get this cross bracing on the right way. Like I said, there's 4 different ways you could put it on. I don't know if it'll make a difference, but I put it on exactly as it came off in this instance. And you just push down and it should snap down on the screws that are sticking out, which are part of the heatsink. Now I'm going to put the motherboard back in the bottom tray, obviously lining everything up for all the input-output ports, and it should sit in flat, obviously. And installation is largely the reverse of the teardown. I'm going to put the fan in first, and there is the electrical connector on the front side of it, so I'll connect that. What I did find is if the power connector was fully removed, you do need to put that power connector in first. So recommend you do the power connector and then do the fan and then plug it in, obviously. And then you could take your power supply unit, feed the cable over top of the fan. There's a little channel for it to fit into, and then put the power supply in place. Everything just has feet and there's little cutouts on the motherboard, so it's pretty easy to identify where things go. And there's a little piece of foam that goes over top of the gap between the fan and the heatsink, and that is to ensure that the airflow actually goes through the heatsink. So put that back on, and there's a little piece of foam that holds the electrical wires down. Now I'm going to take the, in this case, SSD. Like I said, I've already done the change. I'm going to do it in 2 videos, and I'm going to plug all of those wires back in. And finally, I'll just take the optical drive and put it back in place. And you can see there's a little ring on the back of the optical drive with a hole cut out, and that just fits onto the power supply. So it's pretty easy to tell if things are upside down or not, because there's always a little cutout or a little piece of plastic that things have to fit through. So Xbox did a pretty good job in that regard. There's so many screws, so that's my only complaint, is you're going to spend about 5 hours with the screwdriver trying to remove everything. So an electric screwdriver might actually be helpful if you're going to do this, or if you just want to buy some old consoles and fix them up and resell them or something. An electric screwdriver would be helpful. So put the 2 screws on the bottom. I'll put the Xbox One X, sort of the metal housing, back into the plastic housing, a little clamshell there, and I'll reconnect this little side connector that's on the ribbon wire that has the 2 screws. Pretty simple, just screw the screws in. Now my camera does die here right after I screw this little circuit board on the front. One thing I would say though is it's easier to put that ribbon cable on with this circuit board off of the main metal unit. So I am screwing it on here, my camera dies, and then I take it off and I put the ribbon cable on without this little circuit board on the Xbox. So that's the one thing I didn't really show. And then, like I said, once that ribbon cable right there is in place, I just screw everything back on. Again, while my camera was charging, I just put this little side board on as well. Again, 3 screws. And then I put in the 4 screws for the cross bracing. Those little black ones. So very simple, not much was missed when the camera died. And like I said, when putting the screws back in, having the labels of which is a long screw and which is a short screw on the metal housing really helped. So I could just take the screw, throw it in place, and I'd be confident to know that it was the right screw in the right location. I didn't have to overthink it. Once all the screws are in, all you gotta do is take the top of the Xbox One X, put it in place the same way you took it off, kind of comes in at an angle and then slides backwards, and then there's those 2 screws, put those in, and we're pretty much done. Obviously, if you didn't have this ghetto version that I got that, I don't know, was thrown down a flight of stairs or something, you'd have to put the cover on that says what the input and output ports are. Now, because I did the hard drive, I have to do a system update. That's fine, I'll explain that in the hard drive video. Like I said, it'll be a different video and it'll be much shorter. And then I'll just test out the Xbox for a little bit before the kids take over. Anyway, kind of time consuming, but pretty easy to do. Thanks for checking out my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.